And the next item of business is a debate on motion 16489 in the name of Ivan McKee on Local Government Finance Scotland Order 2025. I would invite members wishing to participate to press their request to speak buttons, and I call on Ivan McKee to speak to and move the motion. Minister, up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate on the Local Government Finance Order seeks Parliament's approval to the guaranteed allocations of revenue funding to individual local authorities for 2025-26. It also seeks agreement to the allocation of additional funding for 2024-25, which has been identified since the 2024 order was approved on 28 February last year. We cannot, of course, ignore the challenging circumstances in which we have had to agree the Scottish Budget this year. The Scottish Government's block grant funding for 25-26 represents a 1% real terms increase for resource funding following the welcome reset of budgets in 24-25. This first step to address 14 years of UK Government austerity measures is very much welcome. However, the challenges that our public services are currently facing can only be addressed by longer-term investment plans and commitments. In response to the UK Government's changes to employers' national insurance contributions, the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government announced that the Scottish Government will provide an additional £144 million for local government, the equivalent of a 5% national increase in council tax. However, the UK Government must fully fund the actual cost of this increase for Scotland's public sector and not the much lower value of the Barnett share of funding provided in England. Ministers will continue to press the UK Government, together with our partners in COSLA, to fund the additional costs in full, and I would welcome support from across Parliament in this respect. The 25-26 budget that was passed by this chamber earlier in the week is a budget that delivers for the people of Scotland. The budget invests in our public services, lifts children out of poverty, supports jobs and the economy and responds to the climate emergency. The Scottish Budget delivered record funding of over £15 billion to councils in 25-26. We are providing revenue funding of over £14.2 billion and almost £800 million of support for capital expenditure. The 2025-26 Local Government Finance Settlement provides an additional 8%, or a real terms increase of 5.5% compared to 24-25. The outcome of the Scottish Budget provides demonstrable evidence of our actions to deliver a fiscal framework between Scottish Government and local government. More frequent and meaningful budget engagement has been fundamental in the decisions that underpin the budget, including the real terms protection applied to General Revenue Grant. The budget also baselined a further £525 million of funding, following on from the £1 billion of funding baselined across health, education, justice, net zero and social justice in 24-25. We hope to publish a version of the fiscal framework in the coming weeks, and we continue to work with COSLA to develop the assurance and accountability framework that is critical to further substantial baselining of funding. Presiding Officer, the presentation of figures in the budget comparing the autumn budget revision or the spring budget revision to budget was requested by the Finance and Public Administration Committee. However, the presentation of the local government settlement has been consistent in recent years, and Table 4.12 of the Scottish Budget confirms that by conclusion of the 25-26 spring budget revision, the local government settlement will be over £1 billion larger than it will be at the conclusion of the 2024-25 SBR. It is important to note that the total funding package is already finalised following the passage of the Scottish Budget Bill. Today's debate simply seeks Parliament's approval for the distribution of this approved funding total to individual local authorities. The order seeks approval for the distribution and payment of £13.9 billion of the revenue total of £14.2 billion, with the balance mainly made up of specific grant funding which is administered separately. This £13.9 billion is the combination of General Revenue Grant of over £10.8 billion and the distributable amount of non-domestic rates income, which has been set at £3.1 billion. Yes, indeed.
Willie Rennie.
Could I ask him about the 85% floor and how it's now calculated? Does it include council tax, and are you excluding the biggest beneficiaries of the revenue system? Because by changing the formula in previous years, it has cause significant disadvantage to areas like Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Edinburgh. Is that still the case?
Minister.
I recognise that the member's got a specific local interest in how that calculation is done, but of course it's COSLA that does the work to assess how to do that distribution. So I think if he's got any more specifics on that, I'm happy to take them in writing for me. Sure.
Willie Rennie, and through the chair, Mr Rennie.
But it is through the manual that's produced by the Scottish Government that specifies the 85% floor. So it is government policy.
Minister.
That work is done with COSLA, but if there's any specifics he wants to address on that, I'm happy to pick those up separately with them. There remains a further £155 million of revenue funding that will be notified to local authorities once the distribution has been discussed and agreed with COSLA. This, alongside the £144 million for employers' national insurance contributions, will be included for approval in the 2026 order. There is also specific revenue funding that is paid directly by the relevant policy areas under separate legislation amounting to over £271 million. The 2025 order also seeks approval for over £618 million of changes to funding allocations for 24-25. The full list of changes can be found in the report to the 2025 order. Presiding Officer, this Government recognises the financial challenges that local authorities across Scotland and indeed the whole public sector are facing. The fiscal constraints we share also emphasise the need to focus urgently on improving delivery of public services designed around the needs and interests of the people and communities of Scotland. But we must also continue to press the UK Government for additional funding for our shared priorities and pressures, including full funding for the changes in employers' national insurance contributions. The budget bill passed by Parliament on Tuesday ensured that total funding from the Scottish Government to local government next year increased in cash terms, but also in real terms. This order confirms the distribution to individual councils, and the proposals reflect the crucial role that local authorities and their employees continue to play in our communities. Presiding Officer, I move that the Parliament approves the Local Government Finance Scotland order for 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I call Alexander Stewart up to 6 minutes. Mr Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to be able to speak on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives in this year's Local Government Finance Order. The motion before us today is necessary in order to allocate funding to each of Scotland's 32 councils. Therefore, the Conservatives benches will indeed not oppose this motion. But it's important at this parliamentary time is used to highlight the current state of local government finances and the fact that councils are experiencing pressure from several different directions. This month's report by the Accounts Commission made for concerning reading, with over one-third of councils are using reserves in 23-24 and managed budget pressures, and over half councils have no long-term financial plan in place. Councils are also facing pressures for the increase in the national insurance contribution as a result of the UK Government's tax grab. We welcome the additional £144 million to address this, which was announced by the Cabinet Secretary earlier this month, but COSLA have warned that still leaves a gap of £96 million, which councils will have to find for their own budgets. As discussion with the UK Government continue on this issue, the Scottish Government should stand ready to pass on any additional funding which was made available from Westminster. More generally, when encouraging local government, it is clear that many councils have difficult decisions to make. In many cases, this will involve reducing or cutting important local services. If the Minister has been engaging with councils throughout the budget process, I trust that he will be fully aware of all of this. As the weeks roll on by and councils are finalising their budgets for the coming years, and many have started to set those budgets, some of them are offering as high as 10%. Within my own region, that includes 9% for Stirling, 9.5% for Perth and Kinross, and as much as 13% for Clackmannanshire is being proposed. Happily do so.
Ross Greer.
I'm grateful to the member for taking the intervention. I was wondering if he agrees with me that it's profoundly ridiculous to have a system of tax in Scotland, the council tax, whereby most people are currently paying the wrong rate, and that regardless of what system any of us might wish to replace it with, the first step is surely revaluation, so we have the data on which we can make that decision.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank Ross Greer for that intervention, and I would agree with the member that revaluation is the first step in that direction, and I hope that that can be looked at as we go forward. This budget talks about, as I say, the gaps that are going on. The Scottish Government is claiming that this budget should help councils, but in reality, the flexibility that council tax is only the one level that's left for councils to deal with. It is, of course, disappointing to see that many councils use that lever, but the taxpayers understand and the concern that councils have when they're talking about what they need to do. And that has been a decade of situations. On the one issue, SNP ministers would be well to listen to SPICE, our own research firm within this Parliament, who have said, and I quote, that Scotland's government could find itself being blamed just as much as the councils themselves for these tax hikes. It is also important to note that SPICE talks about the government funding has fallen as a percentage of the Scottish spending since 2016. In other words, councils finding it hard to keep pace with that, and that is the case, because while the government claims to value local government and the important contribution it makes in the communities and stands up for that, in reality these actions do not speak long and hard. What we do see is that improved long-term relationship between local government and Scotland needs to evolve because we had the Verity House Agreement, which brought together the steps of trying to build some sort of relationship. And while there have been some progress when it comes to the reduction in a small part of ring-fencing funding, many councils are still concerned that the agreement will have few benefits for them in the long term. The agreement also supported and shared priorities. Now, we want shared priorities, we want mutual trust and improved engagement, but in reality, none of that has really happened. There are still huge amounts of information that requires, and there is still not the trust between national government here in Scotland and local government from this chamber. And that priority has to be looked at 18 months on, and as I say, a huge amount needs to be done to fix that relationship. But it's clear that local government cannot continue to do such and be treated with such low priority by this SNP government. Councils are dealing with difficult decisions to get their own budgets over the line, and many of them are running out of flexibility within their budgets to manage that process. If Scotland continues with the review, it is important that there is a deal for local government, and I hope that the new relationship will acknowledge just how important our councils are within our community of Scotland, because that's what they want, Cabinet Secretary and Minister. They want to be treated with the respect that they deserve. They have a huge amount of work to do supporting our constituencies and our regions and our communities, and that can only be done with a relationship between the Scottish Government and councils themselves. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I now call Mark Griffin up to 5 minutes. Mr Griffin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's local government finance order, I think, is a step in the right direction, but I think we should look more closely at the claims that it represents a success for the government. And true, it does provide a modest, real terms increase in budget for local authorities, but that increase has to be taken in context. The 2024-25 council tax freeze alone resulted in a shortfall of £417 million, according to COSLA, and that's not including shortfalls caused by previous years' unfunded freezes. COSLA have also estimated that there is a £392 million projected budget gap for Scottish local authorities in 25-26, rising to a cumulative gap of £780 million by 26-27. And within those figures, the funding gap probably that's most alarming, most striking, is the funding gap in health and social care partnerships. That has increased by 187% since 2022-23. Local government has also been given £777 million of capital to support £55 billion worth of assets. There are clearly gaping holes in our public service estate, and those will continue to persist with this settlement. But it's clearly not anyone's fault but this SNP government's. It's been their decisions over successive years which have stripped local authorities of their financial resources. This government keeps using spin and sleight of hand to convince Scotland that it's others that have caused the problems. But the truth is that they've been given a record funding agreement from the UK government of over £5 billion more for this financial year. And because of SNP's choices, that money... Yep, I will.
Minister.
Said that £5 billion is for this financial year. Can I clarify for the record that it absolutely isn't? It's spread over 2 years. It includes revenue and capital, and the real terms increase between this year and next year is only 1%.
Mark Griffin.
Sorry, this UK Government has provided the Scottish Government with over £5 billion of extra. It seems like only this SNP Government can complain about an extra £5 billion and somehow portray that as a negative. You know, we often hear about the voting positions in this chamber. The SNP voted against that £5 billion increase to this Parliament and Government's budget. We never hear anything about that. And I do welcome that record fund settlement from the UK Government. But it is impossible to fully reverse the impact of years of SNP mismanagement, billions of pounds worth of cuts and that years-long stripping back of council finances. And there's an absolute abundance of evidence to show that local services have suffered hugely over that 18 years. The services that are provided now compared to the services that were provided in 2007 are practically unrecognisable. Swimming pools and community spaces like the Beach Leisure Centre in Aberdeen or the Perth Leisure Pool, used by thousands of people a decade ago, are now closed or threatened with closures. More than 20 public libraries are threatened with closure because of significant funding pressures, with the worst affected areas across much of rural Scotland. I'll take Mr Greer.
Ross Greer briefly.
I'm very grateful to the member for taking the intervention. I would just wonder if he would agree with myself and Mr Stewart that it is farcical. Most people pay the wrong rate of council tax, and whatever we agree to do next, revaluation needs to be the first step in that process to give us the data set required to make those decisions.
Mark Griffin.
Yep, I think that is absolutely ridiculous that a valuation system that was set when I think was in primary one, and I'm not sure if the member was even born when that valuation exercise was undertaken, is absolutely ridiculous. It's something that the local government committee is looking at as a first step of reform of the council tax system, is that revaluation exercise, and I think that's something that there's broad consensus across the political spectrum for, because it's clear that we are seeing councils right across the country putting up council tax, a tax that is hugely unpopular, but councillors are making the decision to increase that unpopular council tax because of what they see as the alternative being absolutely unpalatable. The cuts that they would have to consider being going beyond what they are willing to consider. So they are making unpopular decisions on council tax to cover for those service cuts. But there is a real risk, Presiding Officer, and I'll close on this point, that because of successive years of SNP cuts, that councils are now making impossible choices, increasing council tax, trying to stop their residents from having to pay more money for worse services as a result of government choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Griffin. And I call Ross Greer, up to 4 minutes. Mr Greer.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Greens set out two red lines at the start of this budget process. One was in relation to climate and nature spend, but the other was a real terms increase for local government funding and an end to the council tax freeze. And I'm pleased that we have been able to achieve both of those. But as this afternoon's debate has made clear, none of us think that that is actually enough. None of us believe that local government is sufficiently resourced as it currently stands. And a process of annual haggling in here over a block grant allocated to local government is never going to solve that problem. It puts Scotland well outside the European mainstream, that our local government can raise directly only a very small fraction of its overall finances. In most cases, in most European, certainly West and Central European countries, local government raises the majority of its own budget directly. We have made incremental progress in recent years. The visitor levy will be an obvious example to local authorities like the one that we're in now. Edinburgh estimates they'll raise more than £50 million a year. Highland Council will clearly be another major beneficiary of that. We have given councils the power to double council tax on second and holiday homes. That both raises revenue and acts as a direct lever in relation to the housing crisis, particularly in areas like Arran that I represent. And the Scottish Government has today launched the consultation on the cruise ship levy that was announced by my colleague Lorna Slater when the Greens were in government. That will be particularly valuable to areas like Inverclyde in my region that, with the best will in the world, are never going to benefit significantly from the existing visitor levy. all of that is welcome, but it's no substitute for a genuine replacement, a full replacement of the council tax. And I spend a lot of time talking about that, as do other members. I should mention at this point that I don't think we talk enough about non-domestic rates as the other key lever of local taxation, but that's because it's not really. It's nominally local, but is also, of course, set from here. And that gets us to that point that what we've got at the moment in Scotland is 32 regional service delivery bodies, not genuinely local government. It's neither local, and that's a separate issue to the finances, but its ability to govern is massively restrained, and that's in significant part because of its lack of financial powers. And as I've mentioned already in interventions, revaluation is a key first step, one that we do all seem to agree is necessary. So the question then becomes, why in the 26-year history now of this Parliament have we been unable to complete a revaluation exercise? I believe Wales have completed 3 in that space of time. There is clearly a need to make progress here. There is an appetite for it, both in this Parliament and from our colleagues in local government. And I would hope that we don't get to the end of this Parliament having failed to at least begin that process of revaluation. It is absurd to have a system of tax based on valuations from 1991 that has now resulted in most people paying the wrong rate, probably in roughly equal numbers, some people paying too much and others paying too little, but certainly a system that is broken. We can have a debate around the reliefs that would be necessary in any new system, what formulas it would be based on, the transitional arrangements that would inevitably have to be brought into place, either for a few years or for a longer period of time. But we need that accurate data set first. There is no point in progressing with a replacement to the council tax if the replacement is based on those 1991 valuations as well. The Scottish Greens want a replacement to eventually move in to the space of land value tax as well as just property taxation, but we also think it's critical that we don't micromanage that here from Parliament. These matters really are of huge significance to our constituents because it sounds abstract, and what we're talking about here is obviously very technical this afternoon, but in practice what we're talking about is how we fund our schools, our social care services, bin collections, libraries, roads and pavements, leisure centres, libraries and so much more. I don't want us to get to the end of this Parliament once again wringing our hands about our lack of progress on one of the most significant areas affecting our constituents.
Thank you. I now call Willie Rennie. Again, up to 4 minutes. Mr Rennie.
I love Ross Greer's eternal optimism about the reform of local government finance. He and I have sat in numerous working groups and consultations where absolutely nothing has happened, but there's been lots of talk. So I hope one day to share his optimism and that we do get a true reform of the system, because it is outdated. There is no doubt about that. And I think the Minister knows that local governments have been for many, many years, because he'll see it in his constituency casework and in his local community, that they have been starved of funding that's necessary. They have been retreating to statutory responsibilities. The kind of spend to save elements, the preventative measures, are increasingly put on the side as they try to meet their legal obligations. But even then, they struggle to do so. And we see that in the space of additional support needs. We see that in the space of looked after children, of care experienced children. We see it in many other areas. And we've also seen it in our streets, because the state of Glasgow, I know my son is now a student in Glasgow, and I see the state of Glasgow streets, and I see the closure of libraries across the country. I see leisure facilities that are in desperate need of investment, and many are in closing, including in Perth. So there are a number of different problems. So the Minister sees all of this. But the issue I want to raise today is the age-old problem of the disparity of funding between one local authority and the next. And there have been some councils, like Aberdeen, Aberdeenshire and Edinburgh, who have struggled for years to even reach the 85% threshold that was promised by the government years ago, back in 2012. And Mr Swinney and I, when he was Finance Secretary, had repeated discussions, and he went through various contortions to explain to me that the 85% floor was actually being met when it wasn't. And in fact, they changed the formula to include council tax, and then they chopped off the ones that were receiving the most. So, of course, the 85% floor was possible after all. But still the effect is that Aberdeenshire, Aberdeen and Edinburgh, and some other councils, are really being shortchanged by this formula. And I would urge the Finance Secretary to use his charm and his skill to persuade those in government, but also COSLA, to change the formula so that we do have a fairness in the system. Yes, just briefly.
Liz Smith.
Mr Rennie giving way, does he recognise that the problem he's just set out regarding Aberdeen and Edinburgh and Aberdeenshire, that's exacerbated by the fact that we haven't had revaluation since 1992?
Willie Rennie.
I think it was 1991, but yes. But yes, absolutely. The system has been exacerbated by that issue, there is no doubt. But I hope the Minister does take this into account and actually does seek to change this so that, because I've seen the effect in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire and also in Edinburgh, where they have really struggled even to keep up with other local authorities. But saying all that, we will support this order today because we managed to negotiate a budget that secured some significant investment into local authorities, including in the social care support through the NHS, in Orkney and Shetland, but also the employer's national insurance compensation, which will help. But we also need to get the money to local authorities because they need the money. Even if it's not sufficient, they need the money. So we will support the order today. But it is a qualified support, and I hope the Minister does take into account the long-term funding issues, but also the disparity between some local authorities and the others.
Thank you. And I now call on the Minister to wind up the debate. Around 3 minutes, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, the 2025 Local Government Finance Order before us today seeking parliamentary approval to the guaranteed payment of £13.9 billion in revenue support to be paid to Scotland's 32 local authorities. Next year, the Scottish Government will provide local authorities with a total funding package worth over £15 billion, delivering an increase of over £1 billion or 8%, and that's a real terms increase of 5.5%, despite the challenging circumstances I outlined in my opening statement. There is also further Scottish Government support of almost £867 million paid out with the Local Government Finance Settlement. This includes the Attainment Scotland Fund, Schools for the Future programme, area-based schemes, regeneration programmes and city deals that is paid to local authorities, bringing the Scottish Government's total investment in local authorities to almost £16 billion. We have listened to the requests made by COSLA and others and acknowledge that a Council's decision on tax provides important financial and administrative accountability to our local electorate. As well as accounting for local needs, we expect councils to consider the impact of council tax increases on local people and their household finances. We have announced a joint programme of engagement with COSLA to build consensus around reforms to make council tax fairer, with differing and competing views on what that reform should look like. Engaging transparently through our partnered approach, we'll seek to build a consensus on a modernised, fairer local taxation system that can support the local services that communities across Scotland expect and deserve. The settlement also provides continued fiscal certainty through our policy of guaranteeing the combined general revenue grant plus non-domestic rates funding set out in this order. This means that any loss of non-domestic rates income will be compensated for by increased general revenue grant, effectively underwriting this critically important revenue stream. Bearing in mind that the overall quantum has already been confirmed when the budget bill was agreed by Parliament, opposition members should of course note that failure to approve this order would result in Scotland's local authorities, as a consequence, all of our local communities being deprived of over £618 million of additional funding in this financial year and over £1 billion additional Scottish Government investment next year. Presiding Officer, I encourage Parliament to unanimously support the Local Government Finance Order before us in Parliament today. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. That concludes this item of business. There will be a brief pause before we move to the next item of business to allow front benches to change.